This is the Truth Be Told podcast, where we unlock the secrets of strategic communication. Welcome to this Truth Be Told episode featuring two special guests from the University of Central Florida Police Department. We have with us today therapy canine handler and detective Bianca Becker, alongside her cuddly canine partner Luna, one of the department's therapy dogs. Detective Becker is currently assigned to the Criminal Investigations Division at UCF, where she spends most of her time dedicated to the investigation of sex crimes as well as victim advocacy. Detective Becker is an FDLE certified instructor and has presented case studies for international conferences and advanced training courses, such as adult sex crimes investigations, child sex crimes investigations, and advanced interviews and interrogations. In 2023, Detective Becker spearheaded the Start by Believing campaign at UCF to ensure that every officer on campus is equipped to respond appropriately to sexual assault cases and knows how to best support survivors. She's also advocated for a therapy dog specific to sex crime responses and is now partnered with Luna, a French bulldog who accompanies her on sexual assault investigations, and also making her Truth Be Told podcast debut appearance today. Detective Becker's exemplary service and outstanding contributions have garnered recognition at her department and beyond. Just this year, Detective Becker received the Chief's Special Award Commendation for her work to support survivors of sexual assault. I'm excited about this episode. We're going to discuss the unique challenges of working on a campus as a campus police officer, the many benefits of a therapy dog, both for the community and for first responders, and how silence can be powerful in an interview, and how puppy snuggles might mitigate trauma. Stay tuned for the entire episode and see a special appearance from Luna, our therapy dog, later on in the conversation. Welcome to this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast. I'm your host, Dave Thompson, and I'm here with Detective Bianca Becker and Canine Luna, joining us from sunny UCF, Florida. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I am good. I know people have already stopped listening to me and you because they see this cute little snuggly face
Yeah,
on the
it's usually how it
screen.
goes. As soon as
Yeah,
it comes in, everyone stops listening and zeroes in on the dog.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Well, maybe before we get going, you can kind of explain a little bit about your role at UCF and who this cuddly little monster is you have on your lap.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am currently a detective in our Criminal Investigations Division, and my partner and I investigate all the sexual assaults that happen here on campus, or anything under that umbrella. So interpersonal violence, sexual assaults, anything ICAC related comes to us. And this is my canine partner, Luna. And so anytime that we have a victim who's experienced a trauma, specifically a sexual assault, they have the opportunity, if they're a dog person, that they can meet with Luna, and she helps them feel a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more relaxed, which then helps them open up to us a little bit more.
Yeah, I love that. And we're gonna explore her role a little bit more. I love that she's got some hardware around her neck there too.
Yeah. Yeah. So no one actually believed us that she was a police dog, so we pitched it to our supervisor and said, hey, look, no one believes us that she's a police dog. We have to get her some hardware. So we got her a little badge made, and she's been good to go ever since.
I love it. I love it. I know some people are just listening to the podcast. This is probably a good time to pause and watch it on video instead, so you can see what we're looking at here. But I had the chance to meet Bianca at the Ending Violence Against Women conference a few months ago, and actually got to meet Luna as well at the same time. And I know we are kind of talking at that conference about the importance of interviewing victims or survivors of sexual assault and people who've experienced trauma. And so that's something I definitely want to get into on this episode. But I think what's important first is a lot of people are probably unfamiliar with what what campus police is or does, and maybe some of their responsibilities. But even before that is, how did you get involved in that in the first place?
So looking back on my life, law enforcement definitely always made sense for me. But it took me quite a long time to find it. But long story short, I was in middle school, high school. Band was my life. I thought I was going to be a band teacher. I'm going to do music. What does school even matter? I ended up going to UCF as a student as a music major. And once I got into the classes, I was like, you know what? I love this, but this is not where I'm going to end up. So at that point, I finished up all of my general education credits, took some classes, and then kind of started soul searching and figuring out, well, where am I going to go from here? And at the time, Elizabeth Smart, I don't know if you remember her case at all,
Yeah.
but I remember watching her case live whenever I was a kid. I was like 9 or 10 years old at the time, and being kind of a weird kid that I followed that on the news every day. But I was completely enamored. And so at this time where I had no idea where I wanted to go, where I wanted to end up, she came out with her book. And so I read it as an adult and said, you know what? I think this is kind of along the lines of what I want to do. And the more I started reading, I started getting more books, getting more into it. So I switched my major to criminal justice, what every cop does. And then after that, I was lucky that right whenever I graduated from college, UCF hired me and sent me to police academy. So I've been here ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah, but the Elizabeth Smart case was, I felt like one of the first really widely publicized kind of kidnapping, just crazy case. Was it Brian Mitchell, I think, was
Yeah.
the
Yep.
suspect in that case? And, I'm curious, especially since you're surrounded by students and a lot of young people trying to determine their career path now. I wonder how much media and access to true crime has impacted people's interest in the law enforcement profession. Do you get a lot of people talking about that on campus?
Yeah, most of the time people talk to Law and Order is kind of phasing out. Whenever I first came here, everyone was like, "Oh, kind of like Law and Order, Olivia Benson, kind of a thing."
Right.
Now NCIS they think is really cool. So it kind of goes through phases, but they almost have these perceptions of what it's actually like, and it tends to be a little over dramatized, but they think it's really cool and they buy in immediately. So it's
Yeah.
been a good run.
Well, any excuse to get people to interact more with people wearing a badge and a uniform is helpful, which I know is partly
Yeah.
of the success of having a dog like Luna too. I'm sure people are more likely to approach you because it's a little less intimidating when there's a fur. I mean, there's so many people you can't walk past a dog without asking if you can pet the dog. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. And then our agency actually has another therapy dog too. His name is Chipper. He's a lab, and he's adorable, perfect therapy dog. The only thing is people look at him and they see this lab surrounded by a bunch of people in uniforms and badges, and they all think he's a working dog, he's a bomb dog, but all he wants to do is give you love. But
Right.
whenever they see Luna, all bets are off. We have like our students and staff members rolling around on the floor with us, playing with the dog. She sits in their lap and does this, and it's definitely more, I think, disarming. So.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm trying to think, if, especially on a campus right now. I mean, college campuses are feels like very controversial right now if there's this kind of pro or anti law enforcement feel, depending on the situation. But I've got plenty of friends or myself that I feel like if I'm walking past a dog like Luna, you just kind of stop in your tracks and you don't care who's around the dog. You want to pet the dog, talk to the dog, and everything else is just kind of second nature. So I'm hoping and assuming that must build some better relationships
Oh,
in the
definitely.
campus.
Definitely. So going into it, my thought, so like I said, we already had another therapy dog. And so Luna kind of came up because last year, like I said, my partner and I handle all of the sexual assaults and stuff. And so last year, my partner and I were looking at our numbers, we're looking at the national statistics, and UCF is actually one of the largest universities in the country. We usually ping pong back and forth between like 1, 2, and 3 around there, depending on enrollment for that year. And so we were looking at the national averages and comparing it to what gets reported to us and trying to figure out where we break down. And we know that sexual assault is the number one most underreported crime across the nation. But looking at how large we realized that there was a lot of our demographic that just they weren't coming to us. So we hit the ground running and said, what are some of the things that we can do to one, build better trust in the community, but two, help them feel more comfortable and give them a better experience coming to us. And that's kind of how Luna was born. So we added Luna to our program when she was just a puppy, just a few months old, and then I've been doing classes with her ever since to try and get her through training and get all of her certifications needed to be a therapy dog. And I like to think that our chief got a good return on his investment with her, because in addition to helping us with the cases, and there's a lot of community work that she does as well, but the outreach has been great. So we do all of the stuff. We do the coffee with a cop, pizza with police, like you name it, all the kind of gimmicky but great outreach stuff that we do. But like you said, people are usually really nervous to come and talk to us. But once they see the dog, people will start coming in, and we see our numbers kind of go up, and they start engaging with us a little bit better. So it's
Yeah.
great outreach too.
What a tough job she has. She falls asleep on the podcast. She's getting coffee with a cop, pizza with a cop, and just going to events, like all the fringe benefits.
She just gets ushered from here. I'll sleep here, I'll sleep there. It's like green eggs and ham. I'll sleep anywhere.
Yeah.
So, but she was. This is her job. Her whole job is sit in someone's lap and get pets and sleep until they tell me I'm done. And
Yeah.
she's good at it.
Yeah, well, and again, I want to explore that too a little bit further, especially the impact on victims, witnesses, survivors, probably more likely to come forward, or maybe at least more comfortable in that process, which I think is really powerful. I was interested, just talking a little bit about kind of campus police outside of obviously sexual assault and sexual violence type cases, but I was looking at the crime report, and a little bit of everything happens on a campus. It's a mini little city, so I mean everything from saw theft and DUIs and cyber-stalking, fraud schemes, attempted homicide, extortion. I mean a little bit of everything. So for people that have no idea what campus police looks like versus maybe a traditional city or police or county sheriffs, any kind of differences that you've seen, or how do you work alongside other neighboring agencies?
Our jurisdiction is really unique because we sit right on the edge of Orange County. So half of us is on Orange County, and then on our other edge we have Seminole County, and then Florida Highway Patrol has a random road right next to us too. So we're right in the middle of 3 different jurisdictions. But since I've been here, we haven't had any issues like jurisdictionally. I think we work pretty well, and they know that we're here too. And like you said, we are a small city, so we handle a little bit of everything. And we are, because we're one of the largest universities, we definitely have everything in our police department that we would need. So we have like our special response team that would go and handle critical incidents. We have our emergency response team, which is what people associate with like the protests and the riots and stuff. We have our criminal investigations division, which is where Luna and I are, and we have a little bit of everything that we can offer. We got a bunch of canines as well. So it's like a smaller scale city department.
Yeah, I think that's neat. And I was reading a little bit about how Luna may be outsourced to other agencies who have shortage in staff or high demand and request. And there's a whole kind of theme of our podcast is communication. And so I'm curious what that interdepartmental communication looks like, and like how often are you talking to other people who are going through the same process of training a therapy dog and managing it? How do you kind of learn from each other and benchmark some of those milestones?
The therapy dog stuff is definitely newer, especially having like a smaller therapy dog. Orange County Sheriff's Office is right next to us. They have 2 therapy dogs. They run their program a little bit differently. I believe their victim advocates are the ones with the dogs. So, same but different, but their dogs are available, and then their dogs and our dogs are also available to our state attorney's office. So one of the things that Luna does is she works with our state attorney's office. If they have a child who's been through a sexual assault or a child survivor of rape that now has to testify in court, they can call us out and say, hey, this kid is having a really hard time, can you come? And so Luna will go for trial prep, or she'll go show up for actual trial and meet with them. And seeing the difference when we get there versus the difference after they've spent some time with the dog is it really brings them out of their shell. I think gives them a nice experience too, rather than going somewhere where they've never been with a bunch of strangers, having to ask questions. The dog's just kind of the icebreaker and helps them be more comfortable.
Yeah.
She's also
Go
used
ahead.
with our sexual assault response team too. So if
Well,
anyone else on our community has a big case or something that they want the dog for, they can always call us out.
yeah, and I was reading a few examples that you shared of that specific use of Luna, where people have been maybe preparing for a testimony or reporting an incident, and it can obviously be uncomfortable. But then maybe the nerves or the trauma is also going to be higher when they have to testify at trial in a more public setting. So, any example or kind of how does that work from the, I guess, continuance of the interaction with Luna? Is it just all right, they're reporting something, let's bring a therapy dog in, or does that kind of relationship last throughout the trial process?
It just kind of depends. Every case is going to be a little bit different, and what the victim is going to benefit from. So we try to be there as much as we can. If it's one of our cases, the reason why it made sense for me to have one of the therapy dogs is, our detectives all rotate our on-call period. So we're on call for about a week at a time, give or take. And then, but if a call comes out whenever I'm not on call a sexual assault comes out, I'm going to be the one who responds anyway. So it made sense for me to have the dog. That way we're not calling someone else in or trying to get a dog if we can't get one. So Luna will be there if they want one, because not everyone's a dog person, but for the most part, everyone gets really excited. And so whenever they come in and try to report to us, they have the option to meet with Luna. And then it's almost part of our, we hear it all the time in interviews, you don't just jump right in. You know, you kind of sit down, you talk to them, you get to know them a little bit more. And Luna just helps with that. So she comes in, they end up playing with the dog for a little bit, and then once they're in a good place and they're kind of calmed down and relaxed and able to open up, at that point then we'll get into it. And they have the option that Luna can do this and just sleep in their lap the whole time and pet them, or you know, she at that point she can leave the room if they want to just focus on our conversation. But depending on where we are, it was really interesting for me to see it firsthand that when they get more nervous or when they're talking about maybe a more intimate part of whatever happened to them, you see them start petting furiously, or they start really kind of getting into it. And then once they're done, it's almost like they relax and kind of calm down. So being able to see it firsthand has definitely opened my eyes to how these little guys help.
That's so powerful. You mentioned that there's some people that are not dog people. Is that a chargeable offense on
It
campus? Like
should
that
be.
doesn't,
It
yeah.
should be. We actually have a mental health clinician on staff who said, I think we need a therapy cat. I think a lot of people are going to go for that.
Oh man, we just ticked off the cat people on listeners. Yeah. What you just mentioned is really important though, when you talk about really the power of empathy and rapport building, because I don't know, you've got a lot of experience in the interview and interrogation going through training, and you also do a lot of speaking. And you just spoke a little bit to it, but this whole concept of kind of developing rapport or comfort with someone, what does that actually look like when you're walking into an interview room? And I know you guys, I think you have soft interview rooms. Maybe you can explain that
We
a
do.
little bit. But what does it actually look like when you're doing that now with a canine alongside you?
It's 10 times easier. I mean, it's almost like a shortcut because like I said, the difference in people when they see the dog. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm
She
interrupting you.
wants to answer that question, I think, herself. Yeah.
But like, as soon as they see the dog, it's almost like the walls come down, um, and they're just so interested in playing with the dog or seeing the dog and getting their hands on the dog that you just see the defenses come down. And at that point, you know, we'll start talking about, you know, what she does and her background and why she's there and kind of the science behind it. And you know, of course, all they want to do is just pet the dog, but I think it helps. I think one of the issues though is we talk a lot in a lot of the interviews trainings that I've been to is we talk a lot about rapport building. And I know whenever I first started um, in this role, I always thought, okay, we got to sit down, we got to rapport build, and it almost feels like a checklist, and it doesn't feel genuine. They know why they're there. I know why they're there. It almost feels like we're beating around the bush before we jump into it. Um, so the dog just kind of gives us something to kind of put our teeth into and say, all right, you know, let's talk about the dog, and it really does help open them up. And then from there, we can open it up to other things. So I've got other dogs at home. Usually we'll start talking about that a little bit, and then we'll kind of segue into what we're actually there for.
Yeah, it humanizes you, ironically, as we're talking about dogs, I think. But I feel like it humanizes you as an investigator, right? You're not going and just checking the box and just rapid fire asking questions. As you're kind of a human first, investigator second. But when you just mentioned that, I feel the same. Like when we review interviews or even sometimes conduct them, you feel like, all right, rapport. Tell me about yourself. We talk about ourselves for 30 seconds, check the box, and go into this
Yep.
interrogation or an interview with a witness or a victim or a survivor. And when you see a dog meet somebody for the first time, I feel like that's the way reporters should be. They kind of sniff them out, which I don't want anybody sniffing anybody during the interview, but they kind of sniff them out. They get comfortable, but I feel like that rapport builds throughout the entirety of a conversation versus just the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And especially whenever I go through and listen to my interviews back, that was something that whenever I would go back and rewatch my interviews, I'd almost knock myself on because I, I cared about the person and I knew that I cared about them. You don't do this job unless you care about people. But it's about making it real and fitting the situation that you're in. And so how do we make it more than just a checkbox? And so the dog's a really easy way to do that. It's
Yeah.
super quick buy-in.
Yeah, and I was reading, I think it was the International Association of Chiefs of Police put out a kind of a white paper on the importance of the impact of dogs on resiliency and impacting people who've been experienced to trauma. And they put in here it's been proven that canines can help reduce fear, anxiety, depression, and sleep disturbances from people who've experienced trauma. Do you get that kind of either practical feedback from people or do you guys look into the science to see, are you actually measuring data? Yeah.
I'm a nerd, so I do. Um, and a lot of people know it without really knowing the science behind it. But most people have a dog when they get home. How do they greet their dog? Hi, good boy, welcome, lots of pets, lots of hugs, all over the dog. They're on the floor rolling with the dog. Then they see their spouse and it's like, hey, how's your day? Like we just get so happy to see these dogs. And so I started reading the science behind it of like the chemicals in our brains that releases during a traumatic event versus the chemicals that release whenever we see a dog. And so being able to see kind of the science behind it, but also you get to see it in a practical sense. And so the idea of it, long story short, for those people who aren't nerds like me, the idea behind it is that whenever we go through a traumatic event, our brain releases all sorts of different chemicals in an attempt to keep us alive to survive the event. And so the problem with that is once we're done with it, our brain doesn't go, oh, okay, you're good. Good to go, move on like before. These chemicals stay in our brain for about 96 hours after the event. And so if we can bring a dog in with someone who's been through a trauma, and these chemicals can release as they relive it, talking to us too. And the idea is that when people see dogs, if you're a dog person, your brain releases the same hormone as a mother who's breastfeeding her child. And so if we can bring a dog in, they see the dog, they get really excited, their brain's going to start releasing these positive hormones, and it's going to level out the negative ones. And so when people say, oh, my dog is my baby, that's kind of where that came from, is we have the same love for our dogs, albeit on a different scale, than we do for our kids. So
That's great information. Science is important because, number one, you want to make sure something works, not just because we feel like it worked, right? It doesn't just feel good. We can prove that it has an impact. And what you just mentioned, I think, is important as we explore like trauma-informed interviewing. I think a lot of people, whether they're in investigations or not, trauma can come across in so many different ways. My best friend just yesterday called me, has a dog, and was walking his dog, and another, I'm not going to mention the breed of the other dog because I'm sure it'll upset somebody, but the breed, a different dog in a yard on a leash just broke free of the leash, collar just broke off and charged after his dog. And there was a little dog fight. Every dog is okay. But he called me afterwards. He's out of breath and he's emotional and he's trying to remember everything that happened, right? So his memory is off, his emotions are off. And what you just talked about is when people relive that experience, some of those problems come back up again. And so from an investigator standpoint, you've got a traumatic incident, which could be anything from sexual assault to a violent act, witnessing something. But then the interview itself may not take place until a day later, 2 weeks later, 3 months later. So I guess how important is it that we're aware or we're trauma informed during the interview itself, not just when the incident occurs?
yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things is when a victim comes through after a traumatic event, they never look how you expect them to look. And so that's number one. And a lot of people kind of jump the gun of this person's too put together, what have you. But a lot of times, especially with sexual assault, it is going to be a delayed report. And so some of these things, even though some time has gone by, they're not going to respond the way that we expect them to. Like, just because it happened a month ago doesn't mean that it feels like it happened a month ago to them. So they're going to be reliving it a little bit, especially if they haven't really talked about it much or haven't really processed what happened to them. And I think that's huge. But understanding like that trauma-informed side of what these victims go through physiologically as well as emotionally, which is such a huge component of it, is it's very different than, hey, somebody broke into my house when I wasn't there and this happened to me. They're going to respond differently. And so
Yeah.
understanding that no victim's going to look the same or how we expect them to, and not putting that pressure on them, just letting them relax into it and tell you in their own words what happened and go from there makes such a big difference.
Yeah, I think investigate and just lay people make so many assumptions falsely. on a way a victim or witness responds to something or tells a story, that hey, they must be deceptive because they're leaving out these details, or they got the time frame wrong, so they must be hiding something. When in reality, as you're describing, when we're experiencing trauma, we're not necessarily looking at our watch, and time doesn't really work in a linear fashion. And so it doesn't necessarily mean deception. It could just mean this is a result of a traumatic experience.
Well, even those hormones that we talked about earlier, that release, the whole purpose is your brain kicks into overdrive and releases all of these hormones to get you to survive the event. The problem with that is it keeps you alive, so everything's working exactly how it should. The only issue with that is it kind of disrupts everything else that your brain normally does to function, and memory recall is affected. It also affects your heart rate, your blood pressure, all of these different things that are affected, and it affects you. And so being able to go back and remember it, especially the timeline and chronologically, they might remember everything happened, but they can't remember, did this happen before or after this? Or I know this happened, but what led to that? And, how did we get to that point? And so being able to sit with them and knowing that that's normal, I think is huge for an investigator to do, because we can't expect them to say everything like a textbook. It's not a dissertation, it's something traumatic that happened to them. So, being patient and understanding makes a huge difference in their experience coming forward.
Yeah, one of the most, I guess, simplest and obvious takeaways I ever received from trauma-informed interview training is letting the interviewee kind of dictate where the story starts and ends versus saying, tell me about everything that happened from start to finish. It's more to, hey, tell me about your experience, and allowing the person to kind of pick that point that's maybe of most detail or important to them, and building the story from there. Are you seeing the same concept as being most successful?
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. So once I come in and introduce myself and we go through the whole intro, once we're ready to jump into it, I'll usually say something like, I'm sorry that this is why we're meeting here today, or something like that. Like, I know we're not meeting on the best terms, and then from there I'll say, wherever you feel comfortable, why don't you just tell me why we're here today? And at that point, they start talking, and I just sit back and I just shut up until they're done. And I've had one victim talk for over 30 minutes without a break, and then I've had another one who gives me one sentence and then stops, and then another sentence and then stops. And so everyone's going to be different, but letting them go through in their own words exactly what happened to them, and after, thank you for telling me that, and then we'll go back and have some questions. But I think that's definitely the best way to get a lot of information, and they get everything out too.
I think one of the most difficult yet the most powerful parts of an interview are silence, right? And we know as an interviewer, it can be kind of uncomfortable to have silence and not fill that void. But we also know that the interviewee sometimes needs silence to be able to put themselves back into a situation and kind of recreate the context of an event. I'm wondering how Luna impacts the success of that, because I feel like that silence is then filled with cuddles and snuggles and petting and distraction that maybe makes it a little less uncomfortable and easier for somebody to recall an event. What does that actually look like in the room?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is hard to stay silent, but you can kind of tell if they're doing the 1,000-mile stare, and you can tell that they're just not there. Just give them a minute. But like I said, you see the nervous energy. So it's almost similar to what we learn about with suspect interviewing, is when they get nervous, what do? They start playing with their hands. They start playing with other stuff. They start that grooming behavior. All of that stuff comes from the same place, and it comes from, we're feeling nervous or we're feeling anxious. Our victims experience the same thing, just for a different reason. So, you'll see them, for the most part, just sit there, and Luna will be just like this, asleep, and they're fine. And then once they do that 1,000-mile stare, you can almost see that petting start to kick in. And, it's really easy at that point to just visualize and just give them a minute to come back. And a lot of times, too, in addition to having the dog, all of our officers are used to, as soon as they hear those magic words of, something under the umbrella of sexual assault, the first words out of their mouth after that is, would you like a victim advocate? So we do have advocates that will be called out if they want one, that can come meet with us too. So it's not unusual for us to have a dog and an advocate in the room. Whatever we can do to just help them feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, that's really neat to have those resources, especially on campus where, unfortunately incidents like sexual assault, I'm sure are more common than people are aware of, and obviously more common than law enforcement's aware of because of the underreporting that you
Right.
you talked about earlier. So that's really important. Do you think a lot of campuses have those same resources, or is UCF maybe stand out as a leader in this kind of field?
I think it's hard to say. I definitely think that we stand out. We're definitely very progressive. Like most of the agencies that we talk to, they have advocates, but they don't really use them, at least the way that we do. Um, they don't have the therapy dogs. They don't have a lot of these other things that we have. The soft room is really big for our victims also. But ultimately it helps support the victim. So if you can give them a better experience, and then, God forbid something happens to their friend now all of a sudden it's, I went to UCFPD and, you can trust them. And it's about building that trust one person at a time.
Yeah, I think that's really, really powerful. Do you feel like, or have you experienced people that have maybe come forward in any capacity and interacted with you and Luna, that have maintained that relationship? So, 6 months later, they've witnessed an incident, or a year later, maybe they're more likely to come forward or share something with you. Do you see those relationships building outside of just that singular occurrence you might have with someone?
I've only had one case like that, but I think that spoke volumes. So, one of the first cases that I took when I became a detective that I responded to it was a sexual assault case, and so I met with the victim. This is before I had Luna, but we had a great rapport, and so we spoke pretty much anytime she needed anything or she had an update. It wasn't only the interview and the follow up. So she had, in her case, she ended up having a lot of different updates that she would provide me on a couple of months out. But we had a good relationship, and so probably last year I think it was. This is also before I got Luna. One of her friends experienced something, and she referred her to us, and so I think that spoke volumes. But that was the first turnaround where I've had where it was like a word of mouth, but we wouldn't have gotten that other victim to come forward had it not been for the first one. At least I don't think so. And so
Yeah,
I
that's
think that spoke volumes.
Yeah, definitely. And it's, a reflection of you and your department. But when people can build a relationship, that's going to not only allow people to come more forward more frequently with information, but even if you have to do a criminal investigation at some point, depending on how somebody is treated during that interview, may impact their likelihood to be an informant at some point later on in the process, or be truthful or cooperative with law enforcement. And unfortunately, it's not always you that they're dealing with, right? It could be, and it could be an officer, a detective in any jurisdiction across the country. But it seems like you have one negative interaction with somebody in a uniform, and that's going to be the reputation going forward. And so that's why I think it's so important and really neat that you got people like yourself and Luna that can maybe disrupt that negative stigma that some people have with law enforcement.
Well, you said it too. So one of the times that you and I were talking, you said, it should sound like we're just having a casual conversation. Like it's just I can't remember how was it you phrased it, but you said it should sound like we're casual conversation, like having a drink or something.
Right.
And that's how most of my interviews sound. It was the weirdest thing the first time it happened to me, but it's happened a few times since where I finish a suspect interview and I handcuff him and he says, thank you before we leave. And I'm like, dude, I just arrested you. But
Right.
our conversation, most of the interviews end up sounding exactly like you and me today. And so the first time it happened, it kind of threw me for a loop. But um, it shouldn't be this, dramatic. The lights are dimmed on a table, sitting opposite each other, slamming. Where were you on this date?
Right.
It's just not reality.
The detective Stabler approach from
Yeah,
Law and Order. Yeah. No, you're
exactly.
right. Respect, trust, truthfulness is all reciprocal, right? I mean, that's really the purpose of rapport. And you nailed this earlier. It has to be sincere, right? It can't be one of these like you're not walking in pretending to be somebody's friend or pretending to be good cop, just to get information. Is you're trying to be your genuine self, be sincere, and people are going to respect that and see that transparency, hopefully, and then pay it forward by doing the same thing. So I think that's what's really important, is separating the kind of this fake rapport sincerity, which a dog won't fake, and actually building some kind of true relationship. I know, going back to Luna a little bit, and that same concept, it seems like from everything I was reading, in preparation for our call, just physical touch seems to be so powerful. And you mentioned some of the science behind that, but is that what you see is kind of the biggest thing, is the physical touch and the cuddling or the falling asleep in somebody's lap? Is that the impact that you see?
Yeah, for sure. And it's I think one of the things that I wasn't prepared for was I went into this thinking, I want people to come report to us. I want them to trust us with their stories. I went into it thinking about underreporting and community outreach and all of these things. But what I wasn't, I think, fully ready for was exactly what I would see witnessing it. And like, especially like I said, with the state attorney's office, seeing the difference in the kids when they interact with the dog, and it's horrible subjects for adults to talk about, but putting a kid through reliving that on the stand with a bunch of strangers somewhere brand new, of course they're intimidated. It's hard for us to do as adults, and it's not even my case that I'm testifying in. But being able to see the difference in them whenever they interact with the dog, and they hug on her, and they, hold her like a baby and rub her belly and all of these things, and she doesn't care. She just sits there. And I think it does help them feel more comfortable and open up. And I wasn't prepared for the disclosures that I get to. Like, there are people who I've worked with for years that, whenever they meet Luna, the first time they met Luna, all of a sudden I started getting these disclosures like, oh, this happened to me. And I'm thinking, man, like, I've worked with you for a long time now, and this has never come up before. And meeting people on campus, as soon as I tell them she's a therapy dog, they just start disclosing. It's almost like when you have that one friend that you find out's a nurse, and you go, I got this rash on my back. What's this? And they just start opening up. And so, it works on so many different levels, not just what I went into it for, which was single-mindedly of how can we build cases, how can we support victims.
Right.
Seeing the impact is so much wider than I could have ever imagined.
Do you feel like there's an impact? And I don't know if you know the science or numbers behind this, but I was reading that I think it was like 94% of sexual assault or rape, victims, survivors, experience or develop PTSD symptoms within the first 2 weeks of an event. Do you think this interaction of having a therapy dog and having a conversation like this, can it maybe slow that down, prevent some of that, or is it just a momentary distraction, or do we know that answer yet?
I don't know. I would imagine that. I know it helps in the short term, just for what I've witnessed firsthand. I know that it definitely helps. It makes a big difference. I don't really know what the effects are long term, but I do know, like, if I have a case that is going to go to trial, if the victim wants the dog, then of course we would coordinate that, and I try and clear my schedule as much as I can to make sure that I can head down to the courthouse or help however I can beyond the scope of just that initial call.
Yeah.
But just like I said, being able to see the difference in them before and after the dog, it definitely works.
Yeah, you referenced this a little bit earlier, but I think you shared a story, or maybe one of your colleagues did, where I believe there was a child victim who was being prepped by the state's attorney and for trial, and there was a question asked, I think, of the child, are you anything else you have questions about, or what are you interested in? And the question was, is Luna going to be at trial? Are you going to be at trial? Does that sound familiar to a story I read?
Yeah, that's our very first case that we were asked to help with at the state attorney's office, and this girl was so young, and her case there had been like all these continuances. It was like years and years delayed, but she was abused by a family member, someone she was close with, and I think they didn't really talk about it much, or she wasn't supposed to talk about it. And then on top of that, now, one, she has the trauma of being a child victim. Two, now the family doesn't really know how to handle it, so they just talk about it like it didn't happen. And then three, now years later, she's getting called in. She's talking to all of these people who she's never met before, and they're asking her questions about it, and she still hasn't processed and can't understand what happened to her. And so there's a lot of different layers there. And when I first came in with Luna, she was very, she wouldn't look us in the eye. She didn't really want to talk. She was looking down. She was very, very quiet. And she didn't really want to pet Luna at first. She was kind of curious. She asked some questions about her, and then she started petting her. And then, I brought out the dog toys, and she starts playing with the dog. And, after about an hour, now she's holding the dog in her lap. Dog's giving her kisses. They're going kind of back and forth. And then we started our trial prep. And so the state attorney started asking her those practice questions that were going to come up in court. And same thing, Luna sat on her lap and fell asleep, and you see her getting the nervous energy out with the petting, and she was able to talk about everything. And then after we were done, they asked, okay, do you have any questions, thinking, court, process, what's going to happen next, anything like that. And her only question was, she looked at me dead in the eyes and goes, is Luna going to be there? And I was like, I didn't know when court was. I didn't know what my schedule was. But at that point, I was like, I'll move anything. We'll be there.
Right.
And it was the first time that I got to see that. So it was definitely special. And Luna didn't meet her at court. And, but that was like the first time that I really saw it firsthand. And so it was a special case for me. But
Yeah.
she absolutely made a difference.
Yeah, what a cool story. I mean, it does so many things, not only obviously making a child feel more comfortable and supported and safe in the process, but then also from a criminal justice standpoint, you're getting probably more cooperation, more information that may not have came out otherwise. So what a neat impact to have on the community. It's pretty cool. I do want to transition quick. We talked a lot about Luna's use with victims and witnesses and survivors. But what about within the department? I know first responders, dispatchers, everybody, you're under high stress, high emotion all the time. And all too often people forget the same trauma that you're investigating. You can have secondary trauma because you're investigating that and you're exposed to it all the time. So what does that look like, Luna's impact on the department itself?
Yeah, that's another curveball that I wasn't expecting going into this, but it's been great to see. There were people, so whenever I first got Luna, it was a little different. I was paired with her when she was about 4 months old, so she was still very much a puppy. And before we can go into the therapy dog classes and everything, we had to do this. She had to learn her name. She didn't know her name, and sit and down and stay, and all of these puppy things before we could get into our actual training. And so when she was still a puppy, of course, everyone wanted to play with the puppy. And so they'd all come. Her crate is next to my desk, and so I'd be typing reports, and I'd get a call from dispatch. Hey, are you free right now? And I'd be like, well, no, but I've got time for you guys. What do you need? And they go, can we play with the dog? And anyone who's been in law enforcement knows, if dispatch asks, dispatch shall receive.
Right.
So I'd always go down there, and it turned into a couple times a week. I'd bring the dog down. They could all play with the dog. And same thing. Some of the dispatchers I had known for the years that I've been here, all of a sudden started, having these disclosures and opening up, and I'm like, I just wasn't expecting that. And then so our other employees will come in and out of our office. So I work in a big office with all the other detectives, and they come in and out, and they play with Luna and our other therapy dog. And we know when our chief has had a particularly hard meeting or schedule of events, because our chief will come in and start playing with the dogs. And so it works on so many levels from the top down. I know, all of us too, like Luno trade off from lap to lap, or Chipper comes and he likes to sit in people's chairs at their desk and hang out with them. So it definitely works within the department too. And if we have like officers that have a hard call for a service or something, and our CISM team is going to meet with them, there's always the option to have the dogs there as well. And, a bunch of cops don't want to talk about their feelings after a crazy call. But having the dogs there kind of helps them open up a little bit too. It's a nice little distraction.
It's hard to be mad or upset when you've got a dog snuggling on your lap.
Yeah, that's accurate. It's a good way to put it too.
Yeah, but that's neat. So for first responders or officers, is it always where an investigator officer might have to request, or is there any proactive approach there? Hey, there was a difficult scene they responded to, and so you're going to bring Luna regardless, to kind of give them that opportunity without having to, I guess, ask for it.
It kind of depends on the situation, but for the most part, I try to be available or hang around and stuff like that. But if it's a call that happened on shift, we have our CISM team that's kind of like our peer-to-peer support team, that they'll come in and they'll meet with all the officers. So if they have, they'll schedule like a meeting a couple days after the event, and so they'll talk to us, and we'll have the therapy dogs there if they want them. And it kind of depends on who's running it, but they're definitely available for everyone.
What I would imagine is really powerful there. We've got another episode coming up soon specifically about mental wellness for first responders and suicide and all the unfortunate realities of that profession. But it's so difficult for people to stand out and say, hey, I need a therapist. I need to talk to somebody. But that stigma might be less obvious when it's, hey, I just want to pet the dog. And in reality, they're kind of getting some of the same treatment without having to ask for it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and
really neat.
between the dog and we have a mental health clinician on staff that deals with, because mental health is so big on anywhere, but especially within university, a lot of the mental health illnesses tend to onset between 18 to 25, which is our entire demographic. And so we have a mental health clinician that's on staff to kind of handle things like that. And I think she gets it too, where people come in and they start petting the dog and they'll kind of start talking to her like it's not anything, but they definitely use her too. So it's definitely funny seeing the impact that the dogs have and then having a clinician on staff. It's like I'm not seeking services, but I am kind of talking to someone. So, yeah.
Yeah, without even realizing that you're receiving services
Exactly.
at that
Yeah.
time. How much is Luna helping you in your personal outside of wearing the uniform all day, your personal life? Does she calm you down as well? She have the same effect, or have you built some tolerance to therapy at this
I'm
point?
still happy every time I see the dog. And then I've got my own dogs at home, and so every time I get home, it's, just like a dog party. So everyone gets pets, everyone gets love and kisses, and it's an instant mood lifter, who doesn't love that?
Yeah, exactly. If we've got a lot of law enforcement that listen to the episodes, do you have any resources or references that if they're thinking, hey, this would be really neat to introduce to our department, anywhere where they can look to start and understand that process?
Um, there are. In terms of doing it law enforcement specific, you can always share my info too. So even though we had a therapy dog, um, basically when Luna came up, I put together an entire pitch for our chief, and I broke down everything from the budget to the benefits to the wider scope and everything that I saw, and then from there we had to build policies and procedures and all of that stuff, all the fun stuff. And so we built it from the ground up. And so if anyone has any questions, they can always reach out to me. I'm happy to share what we have and share how we do it and how, dog selection, anything that they need, certification. And there's different organizations that help with law enforcement too. We ended up using a group here local to Orlando. They helped us find Luna and get paired with her. They helped us find our other dog too. And then Luna, like I said, needed all of the trainings and certifications, and so they helped me go through all the classes and do all the motions of that. So it was definitely a lot, but a lot of these companies help for civilians too. And so if they want something law enforcement specific, I'm happy to share what I have.
That's great. What's the easiest way to connect with you or UCF?
LinkedIn, or I can share my email with you too. And I don't know if you have like notes that you want to put that in, but
Yeah,
my email is
perfect.
bianca.becker@ucf.edu, and I'm also on LinkedIn too. So
Yeah, we'll definitely include that in the show notes. I know you're pretty active on LinkedIn. I know yourself and your partner have done a lot of speaking engagements where you're educating people across the country on these concepts and others that we didn't even dive into a whole bunch of other stuff you've done in your career. So I know you've been a great resource for all of that. I want to give you one last question. If you've got any kind of last parting thoughts or one final truth takeaway that you'd want listeners to walk away with.
yeah, and I'm actually gonna wake Luna up for this one. So
Okay. Oh,
we talked
she's gonna
about
be
it.
grumpy on that first response. There she is.
We we talked about it before. Sexual assault is the number one most underreported crime. But I heard this one time and it really stuck with me. I can't control what happened to you, but I can control your experience moving forward. And I think a lot of times with law enforcement, with how we used to be trained, I think we've done a much better job recently of, that trauma-informed interviewing, building empathy, that rapport building and stuff. That used to be unheard of. It used to be show up and, just the facts, just tell me what happened. And so I think we've done a really good job of changing that, but just keeping in mind that this is the most underreported crime because of um, because of how victims used to be treated versus now, and there's still that stigma. And so every time I go into an interview, I try to think back on that. I can't change what happened to you, but I can change your experience moving forward. And so anything that we can do, whether it's something as easy as getting them water or a granola bar, whatever that is, having a soft interview room. If you have a dog, that's great, but not everywhere has that. But whatever we can do to help our victims feel comfortable and support them coming forward and talking to us, just do it, because something might happen to them again, or you're not going to get the full story if they don't feel that support. And so doing anything that we can to go above and beyond and just support them, it's just such a game changer. So I definitely encourage everyone to think about it that way, of how can we help them.
It's a great message. And, I know we're talking specific kind of this law enforcement capacity, but just so you know, we've got a lot of listeners at human resources, loss prevention, parents, teachers, that you might be interacting with anybody who's been maybe even responsible for something bad that happened, right? Maybe even a guilty party, and you can't impact that either, but it's how that process is managed afterwards. So I think that's really powerful. Great final message. I'm glad you woke up Luna for 30 seconds and she said, man, I'm clocking out.
Yeah,
And
she was bred to sleep in people's laps, and she's very, very good at her job.
She's been trained well. Well, it's been an awesome conversation. Thank you, not only just for today, but I know everything that you've done. You are consistently pursuing continued education and then sharing that education with everybody else. So I thank you for doing that. It's awesome for the law enforcement community and for obviously the community that you represent. And thanks for bringing Luna on with us as well. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great.
Yeah. Everybody, we'll include some of the information that Bianca shared in the show notes. But thanks for listening. This has been a Truth Be Told podcast with Detective Bianca Becker and Officer Canine Luna. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And to keep this conversation going, follow the Truth Be Told podcast on LinkedIn and Truth Be Told CFI on Twitter. On behalf of the International Association of Interviewers, Rick Lander-Zalowski, and our valued sponsors, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast.